What is going on, everyone? I hope you are all having a fantastic day. So at the end of last week, the House of Representatives did pass the HEROES Act, which was the latest proposal that would give you another $1,200 check and a few other benefits. But like we talked about last week, the Senate has made it pretty clear that they are not a big fan of a large amount of the fluff that is in this bill. So with a lot of uncertainty around the HEROES Act and more questions around the next stimulus checks in general, I just want to clear up what is currently going on in Washington and give you an update on what we can expect based on the latest information. Make sure you subscribe and hit the like button if you do enjoy today's video, and let's jump right into it. So like I said, the HEROES Act did pass the House last week, but anyone who follows the news knows that this has a pretty slim chance of actually passing the Senate, at least with any kind of efficiency. So the first thing I want to address is, why is it so difficult for them to figure out all of this stimulus check stuff? I mean, obviously passing a bill is a little more complicated than you may think, but from the big picture, there are Americans who are losing their jobs and suffering financially, and a stimulus would help resolve this. So why is it so difficult for Washington to agree on the numbers? And why do they get caught up in the finite details and political roadblocks? Well, if you ask me, it's because they just don't get it. Now, I don't want to generalize this opinion for all members of Congress, because I'm sure there are many of them who can relate to the struggles of the American people right now. That being said, many of our leaders in Washington, especially those who have a lot of influence over their peers, are career politicians, and they've made a handsome salary for decades and decades. And while I would never discredit someone for working hard and having a successful career, it would be short-sighted to think that all of these members of Congress and politicians can directly relate to the financial struggles of the American people right now. Many of these career politicians have forgotten what it's like to lose their job, have no source of income, or no way to even put food on the table for their families. And that can make it difficult for them to make effective and efficient decisions, despite the many cries for help coming from around the country. Again, I don't want to generalize those statements for all members of Congress, but when was the last time Mitch McConnell or Nancy Pelosi lost their job or went hungry because they couldn't afford food? Both of those individuals I just mentioned have been members of Congress since the 80s and have likely forgotten what this struggle is truly like to live with. And that's not to say that it is their fault, but it's fair to assume that this alters their decision making, especially with an election coming up in just a few months. Just some quick statistics to put this in perspective: 78% of US workers currently live paycheck to paycheck, meaning if they go one time without their paycheck, then they'll likely have to go into debt, and if they don't have access to that in some way, then suddenly there's no money to buy the most basic necessities. On top of that, 1 in 4 American workers doesn't set aside any savings each month, and 3 in 4 of those workers have some sort of debt, with half of them saying they will have debt for the rest of their lives. And that's a pretty sad statistic to hear. Now, of course, it's easy to blame the individual and say, well, they should have saved and they should have had an emergency fund.
Fully funded emergency fund.
And there is some merit to that, but this is not the time to be blaming or shaming your neighbor who is struggling just to put food on the table. Yes, obviously, if everyone had a substantial emergency fund, then this entire situation would be extremely different. And hopefully these individuals who are struggling can use this as a learning experience to learn the importance of having an emergency fund. But right now, shaming someone who's a poor saver and has been spending like a maniac is not going to do anyone any good. Okay, so we have the HEROES Act that is moving on to the Senate, and we'll obviously have a lot of debates and alterations, and it's important to mention that the HEROES Act didn't easily fly through the House of Representatives, as you may have expected. And there were many representatives, even Democratic representatives, who had a lot of questions and issues with this proposal. So even though we have heard a lot of Republican senators say that the HEROES Act is dead upon arrival, I wouldn't say it's safe to assume that at the moment this bill has absolutely no chance of getting anywhere. I'm sure that Congress as a whole is really starting to feel the pressure from the American people, and wasting a whole week on a bill that they never intend to actually pass is only going to kick this can down the road further and prolong the inevitable that another round of direct payments is going to be needed eventually in order to avoid long-term economic damage. We've heard this from countless economists, members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, and now even the president himself. The fact is that 30 million people have lost their jobs, many people can't even afford the most basic necessities, and the health crisis has yet to be resolved, which is still the prime issue in all of this. So the question around the second stimulus check is not necessarily if anymore, but how much and when. And these two questions of how much money and when will you get it are two questions that we have spent a lot of time talking about in various different videos. And both of these answers have and will continue to change as we get more and more information. But here's what I personally would like to see myself. I think that most of us would agree that $1,200 just isn't enough money, and if you're going to dig us into a cavern of debt, you might as well make it effective for the American people. Sure, they spent $2 trillion, which included support for small businesses and state and local governments, as well as those $1,200 checks from the CARES Act. But by the time most people got their payments, they had already dug themselves into debt and had bills that they had to pay. So when that payment arrived, it was already gone. However, based on those statistics that we just talked about earlier in this video, I think it's pretty clear that most Americans do not have the discipline to manage these large payments. So with that in mind, I would love to see a recurring monthly payment, but at a smaller amount that actually has a chance of getting passed. Now, we've seen those recurring payments from many of the bills over the past few weeks, and usually they're around that $2,000 per month mark, but as we'll talk about later this week, it's just too expensive, and some of these bills would cost nearly $10 trillion, which obviously has raised a lot of eyebrows on both sides of the aisle, regardless of your political affiliation. But giving everyone a one-time lump sum payment isn't necessarily the answer either, since we don't know how long the pandemic will last, and it also makes it very difficult for people to ration the money that they have. For example, if the government were to send you $5,000 right now, most people would go out and buy the necessities with their food, keeping a roof over their head, and of course getting toilet paper. Then they would probably use the rest of that money to pay off any debts that they have, especially if they haven't paid their bills in several months. But once that money is gone, that's it, and the bills are only going to keep coming next month, and now you have no way of keeping up with those payments. But instead, if you received $1,000 each month, you would be able to ration these funds, and while obviously this isn't enough money to support your average family for a month, you would be able to adjust your budget accordingly, knowing that these $1,000 payments would continue to arrive as long as the pandemic lasts. If you're watching this video, there's probably a good chance that you're pretty responsible with your money and could handle a one-time lump sum payment, but you'd be surprised how difficult it is for a lot of individuals to stretch their available money even over just a few weeks. This also appeals to the most important point, and that is proposing a bill that will actually get passed. Because as we said before, who gives a crap about $2,000 a month if it's never actually going to happen? Now, I'm not saying that something like $1,000 a month would easily pass the Senate necessarily, but at least it is a step in the right direction. And with some important alterations to the HEROES Act, it is very possible that something like this $1,000 recurring payment could happen, depending on how they adjust the spending for state and local governments, small businesses, as well as corporations. So while I don't think this is likely to happen anytime soon at least, I would love to see that $1,000 per month in recurring payments with limited income thresholds and a more focused approach that doesn't give the stimulus money to wealthy individuals who don't need the help. And again, I completely understand the argument of, well, why should these people who are bad at saving and spent like they were in Congress receive money while the people who worked hard and saved their money diligently get nothing? But this is not the time to blame and shame your neighbor and get pissed off now that they can feed their family while you would probably spend this money on vacation if you didn't need it otherwise. Is this fair? Debatable. In my opinion, not really, but it's what needs to be done in order to help those who are suffering right now in ways that most of us can't even begin to fathom. And regardless of how badly we want a larger recurring monthly payment, it's getting to the point where a more realistic approach is a lot more important than some wishful dream that's never going to happen. Something like a $1,000 per month recurring payment with those restricted qualifying factors would appeal to House Democrats who have been calling for this all along, and also cut down significantly on the total cost of the bill, which obviously appeals to House Republicans who have largely been concerned about taking on more debt. But hey, this is just my opinion, and I'm sure you are thinking that $1,000 is useless and wouldn't really do anything. So I'm curious what you think of all of this. Let me know what you think of this $1,000 per month in recurring payments, or if you have a better idea that is both realistic and effective. Remember that $1 million to everyone might be effective in helping everyone financially, but it's not realistic, while a one-time $1,200 payment is very realistic, but is not effective in helping everyone financially. And finding that balance is exactly what Washington is fighting over right now. So I challenge you to find that balance and that perfect solution, and let me know what you come up with down in the comment section below. Of course, don't forget to check out the links in the description where you can get your free stocks and also sign up for a free SoFi money account and get $75 for absolutely free, completely guaranteed. It's a fantastic platform that I'll be talking a lot more about in the future, where you can save, invest, spend, borrow, and it really does combine the best features from many of the other financial platforms that I've talked about here on the channel. So if you do want to check out SoFi, be sure to use that first link in the description to get your $75 for absolutely free when you open up an account with them. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button if you did enjoy today's video, and of course, take it easy, and I'll see you in the next one.